Hello everybody, this is Ethan from CloudMine once again, and I'm going to be talking to you about promises. So before, we had a simple done function, which said this is basically when we're done our execution, and then we had the asynchronous callback hell, where you start and say, okay, we are going to read a file, and then we're going to append information to that file, and then when we're done, we are going to finish writing to another file. And these callbacks are nested inside of each other, which means every single time our indentation moves over further and further and further. And this is just a symptom of these nested callbacks that makes Node asynchronous programming really, really annoying. Now, in this example, we have the issue of we're not handling the errors. And when we do handle the errors, it ends up looking like this. This is not nearly as nice as the previous example, but you have to handle errors correctly because trust me, you will have errors in your code and unexpected things will happen. Especially when you're dealing with I/O and HTTP requests, who knows what could go on. So every time you make a request here, we have to check to see if there's an error. And if there's not an error, we can continue with our flow. But whenever there is an error, we have to call our finished function and say, hey, we're done and there was an error. And then we'll let whoever called us in the first place handle it. But as you can see, this causes even more nested functions within each other because we have to check the error every single time. And it begs the question, is there a better way to do this? And it turns out there are better ways to do this. There are two main ways, and the first one is called unwinding, in which each of the methods calls the other method from each other rather than nesting them in. We'll take a look at that. And of course, the other way is promises, which is my favorite way of handling it. So when you're unwinding the functions, basically what this means is you want to separate them out into individual little chunks, and then each function can call the next one. So the first part of this works like this, where you have a function called read, for example, which takes a callback itself. And what this function does is very simply call the fs read file function and passes in the callback. It says, hey, you passed a callback to me, I'm going to pass a callback to you, and we're going to let whoever called me in the first place deal with this. And each of these methods has that same sort of signature. So how do we go about calling these in the first place? Well, let's take a look. First, we define the read callback. This is what we're going to call in the first place, right? We're going to say, okay, function read callback, and it takes the error in the result. And this is straight whatever we get from the read file. So whatever read file is giving back, that's what's going to get passed in here. And if there's an error, we're going to call this function called append callback, which we haven't defined yet. But let's assume there was no error. We're going to call append, which is the next function in our list of things to do. Remember, we read, we append, and then we write. And you can bet that when append's done, it's going to call another callback here, which, if there's no error, we'll call write. So the entire thing ends up looking like this, where you have an append callback, which calls write, and then the write callback, which would call done when it's finally finished. And so this is how you've unwound your nested callbacks into something that's much prettier. You basically have each of these defined right here with very simple methods, and then the callbacks are defined separately too, with each callback calling the next person. But you'll notice we still have to handle these errors. We haven't escaped handling them because even if you call read, there's going to be an error, and append, there's going to be a call and error, and we have to propagate that error throughout all of our callbacks so that when we finally get to the end, well, if there's an error, we can send it back to the person who called us originally. So it begs the question, is there an easier way? Well, there is, and we will talk about it in our next video.